the skeletal system with chapter 7, where we're getting into the other division of the skeletal system, the appendicular skeleton. So we're going to go into the bones that we find in both the pectoral and pelvic girdles. We'll talk about how this kind of unites the limbs to the axial skeleton, how we make the connection to that. And then we'll talk about the bones we find in the upper limb, including in the arm, forearm, wrist, and hand. We'll talk about some of the features in the pelvis and talk about the difference between adult male and female pelvis. And then we'll also talk about the lower limb and get into the thigh, leg, ankle, and foot. And then lastly, with this chapter, we'll get into embryonic formation and growth of the limb bones, just like we did with the last chapter. So just as a reminder, in case you forgot, the axial and appendicular skeleton divisions, we have the axial skeleton shown here in beige, and the appendicular skeleton shown in that blue-gray. If you don't remember some of the components of the axial skeleton, I would go back to the previous chapter videos and review those. So let's get into the first component, which is the pectoral girdle. The pectoral girdle, aka the shoulder, right? We're going to get into the bones for this, and we're also going to talk about the functions. So the pectoral girdle is composed of the bones that are going to attach the upper limb, or what we would casually know as the arm, to the axial skeleton or to the trunk. And there's two bones that really make this up, the scapula and the clavicle. So here's our pectoral girdle. Now there's not a lot of bones involved here, but we're definitely going to get familiar with the components of the bones. So the only two bones I said, like before, is the clavicle, also known as your collarbone, and the scapula, also known as your shoulder blade. But these two bones come together to form a pretty intricate joint. So let's talk about the clavicle first. So the clavicle has a slight kind of S curve, this like curvy shape to it. We have one that is kind of this end that is a bit more rounded and one that's kind of more flattened. The acromonial end is on one side. That is going to be on the end that goes into the shoulder. And then the sternal end, this is going to be the side that goes towards the sternum. So we're looking at this one here, right? If we're looking at the superior and the inferior view, right? Posterior, anterior, we're getting this kind of, getting ourselves oriented with this. The scapula is a much more complicated looking bone. It has a lot more features to it, right? But again, these two bones are coming together to form a very important joint. And so let's go ahead and kind of go through some of these features of this bone. We have the acromion, which is going to be over, if I'm over here on the left side, this part that is jutting out, right, up in the front, right, or sorry, out in the back. So here we're looking at it from the anterior side. Here we're looking at the posterior. So the acromion is going to be right there in the back, with the coracoid process wrapping around in the front of it. And then we're going to have what's called the glenoid cavity. The glenoid cavity is going to be where our humerus can articulate with. Coming down from the acromion, we have the suprascapular notch, right, because it's above the scapula. So this is on the top side of the scapula. We have this notch, and the superior border, the superior angle, the supraspinous fossa, so the top one, so supra, right, that should tell you, that should give you some information. We have the spine of the scapula, so that's why that's supraspinous fossa, because it's above the spine of the scapula. The infraspinous fossa, just below that, and then the subscapular fossa is down at the bottom of that. And then we have the lateral border, which is the one that goes at the angle, the inferior angle, which is that very bottom point, and then the medial border coming up and around. Right, lateral and the medial borders are named based on where they fall along the midline.